Back in August 2025, the USS Ford Strike Group was doing what American naval forces have been doing in the North Atlantic for 4 decades, making sure the shipping lane stayed open so your Swedish furniture could make it to America. Everything was routine until their airborne surveillance picked up something that would kick off the most epic submarine chase since the height of the Cold War. What the Americans didn't know was that Moscow had just issued fresh orders to their northern fleet. Get close to the carrier group and vacuum up every piece of intelligence you can find. But the Kremlin was about to discover why picking a fight with the US Navy in the Atlantic Ocean is roughly equivalent to poking a sleeping grizzly bear with a stick. Deep inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the watch officer studied the incoming submarine tracks with the kind of calm confidence that comes from having 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers loaded with enough firepower to convert any submarine into scrap metal. Based on their current approach speed, the hostile contacts would enter torpedo range in precisely 47 minutes. The Russian submarine commanders were doing their own calculations. Once they reached firing position, their torpedoes could cover the remaining distance to target in under 6 minutes. What they hadn't factored in was that the Ford's destroyer escorts carried ASROC anti-submarine missiles that could reach them in just 90 seconds. At 15:03 hours, the Admiral requested an assessment of Russian intentions. The answer was crystal clear. At their current speed and bearing, they'd be within intelligence gathering range in 40 minutes flat. The staff recommended sounding general quarters immediately, but the Admiral's response was pure American swagger. Let's see exactly how embarrassed they want to get today. That was assuming the Russians could even maintain their stealthy approach. Within moments, the Link 16 data network automatically distributed the submarine contact information to every NATO platform in the region. What unfolded next resembled watching an elite SWAT team mobilize against someone attempting to steal candy from a convenience store. A British Type 23 frigate running training exercises 50 nautical miles to the north immediately reversed course and began racing south at maximum speed. 8 P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft launched from airfields across Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. Each of these $130 million submarine hunters possessed sensors so sensitive they could detect a crab walking across the ocean floor at 500 meters depth. The Virginia-class attack submarine that had been quietly trailing the Russian boats since they departed their home port 3 days earlier finally received authorization to make her presence known. At 15:15 hours, the tactical situation shifted from concerning to absolutely hilarious. The Russians attempted what they believed was a sophisticated deception maneuver. One submarine climbed to 200 meters depth while deliberately making noise, hoping to distract attention, while the other 2 boats went deep and tried to sneak past undetected. These were classic Wolfpack tactics straight out of 1943. Unfortunately for them, this was 2025, and NATO's acoustic analysis systems could distinguish between 1 noisy decoy submarine and 2 supposedly quiet boats that sounded like shopping carts with broken wheels rolling down a metal hallway. The Russians weren't just being aggressive, they were executing a coordinated intelligence operation that might have been revolutionary in 1985. Their mission was to record the Ford's acoustic signature, map the escort formation patterns, and catalog every radar emission. This data would be invaluable if you were planning to engage the US Navy in combat. The problem was that the Russians had absolutely no idea what was about to hit them, as dozens of ships and aircraft began converging on their position like angry shoppers rushing a Black Friday sale. By 2000 hours, the first P-8 Poseidon arrived on station, and the 3 Russian submarines were about to receive a masterclass in what overwhelming force means in NATO terminology. The P-8 is essentially a Boeing 737 that abandoned its dreams of carrying vacationers to tropical destinations to become the world's most advanced submarine hunter. At $130 million per aircraft, it can detect marine life having domestic disputes at 500 meters beneath the surface. The P-8 began operations by deploying Sonobuoys in what's called a barrier pattern. These directional command activated Sonobuoy systems are essentially underwater microphones that blast submarines with sonar until they surrender their positions. Each buoy costs more than the average Russian's annual salary, and NATO was distributing them like party favors. Every buoy began transmitting active sonar pulses at 140 decibels. louder than standing next to a firing gun, except this was happening inside a sealed metal cylinder. Picture being trapped in a shipping container while someone pounds on the outside with sledgehammers continuously. Inside the Kazan, the first sonar pulse struck like someone had transformed their submarine into a massive bell and taken a baseball bat to it. The sonar technicians yanked their headphones off so violently they probably needed chiropractic treatment afterward. Their beautiful, silent running capability vanished instantly. They were now the noisiest object in the ocean, like a motorcycle gang roaring through a library reading room. Every 30 seconds, ping, no escape, no relief, just endless ping. While the Russians were experiencing acoustic torture, the P-8 air crews were living their absolute best lives. Fresh crews rotating every 4 hours, actual meals that weren't squeezed from tubes, restrooms that didn't share space with nuclear warheads. They were basically operating from a flying coffee shop while the Russians were trapped in the underwater equivalent of a budget airline middle seat. But the US Navy was just getting warmed up. Time for the Arleigh Burke destroyers to justify their existence. They activated their hull-mounted sonar arrays, bow-mounted spherical systems containing hundreds of acoustic transducers that listen for echoes bouncing off submarines like underwater radar, and joined the sonic bombardment. These systems generate so much acoustic energy that fish swimming near the ship literally get stunned. The Russians weren't just being hunted, they were experiencing what happens when America decides to use the entire ocean as a concert amplifier. Then came the mock attack runs. P-8s would dive from 25,000 feet, screaming toward the ocean surface like they were about to release actual weapons. The Russian submarine crews, already operating on zero sleep, had to assume each approach might be genuine. Emergency dive procedures, blow ballast tanks, hard rudder turns. It's like someone repeatedly fake punching you in the face. You flinch every single time, even when you know they're just messing with your head. The Kazan attempted the submarine equivalent of a high-speed chase, pushing 30 knots in a desperate sprint to break contact. The OK-650V reactor forced 43,000 horsepower through the water, which sounds impressive until you realize it made them sound like someone dropped a cement mixer full of marbles down an elevator shaft. But why would the Russians endure all this punishment? Look at those radar arrays mounted on the forward superstructure. Every radar system has a unique signature, specific frequencies, pulse patterns, power output levels. Capture that data and you can develop electronic jammers to blind it. They were recording the entire electromagnetic spectrum, cataloging every emission. The carrier launches aircraft every 90 seconds during flight operations. That timing reveals crew rotation schedules, maintenance windows, and periods of vulnerability. They were mapping which escort ships used which communication channels, how the formation coordinated operations, building a complete digital blueprint of American carrier battle group procedures. This intelligence would enable them to develop specific weapons and tactics to attack carrier groups, except NATO wasn't about to let them complete their homework assignment. All 3 submarines deployed acoustic decoys, devices designed to mimic submarine sounds and confuse their pursuers. NATO's response was beautiful in its efficiency. Their computers identified each decoy in approximately 1/3 of a second, essentially responded "nice try" and maintained perfect tracking on all 3 actual submarines. It was like watching someone try to escape police by throwing a mannequin out their car window, while the cops have helicopters, satellites, and your license plate number. And the situation was only going to deteriorate from there. By hour 24, NATO had elevated submarine hunting to an art form. A British warship arrived with her Type 2 087 towed array sonar, dragging 2 kilometers of hydrophones behind her like underwater listening devices on steroids. MH-60 Romeo helicopters began rotating ships, hovering 50 feet above the surface and lowering their dipping sonar systems to search for the submarines. The Russians attempted to hide using thermal layer boundaries, underwater temperature variations that can deflect sonar signals. Unfortunately for them, dipping sonar penetrates thermal layers like they don't exist. It's like trying to hide from your spouse behind a glass shower door. Despite how effortless these aircraft made it appear, the coordination required for this operation was absolutely mind-boggling. One mistake could result in aircraft colliding with each other. To prevent this, NATO had divided the airspace into precise sectors. P-8s operating between 20,000 and 25,000 feet, helicopters below 500 feet, with 5,000 feet of horizontal separation between all aircraft. Each nation was assigned specific radio frequencies. Americans on UHF, British on VHF, Norwegians on both because they needed to translate everything. Every aircraft operated within an assigned patrol zone, like aerial parking spaces, and required permission from the airborne controller to leave their designated area. The controller was simultaneously managing aircraft from 3 different nations, each with unique capabilities and limitations. The Data Fusion Center at Northwood was combining sensor feeds from all platforms in real time, creating a 3-dimensional picture of the battle space that resembled the world's most expensive video game. Except this was reality, and these sailors were having an absolute blast tormenting the Russians. The helicopters would position themselves directly above the submarines, lower their sonar systems, and begin pinging. The Russian crews could probably feel the vibrations in their dental work. Meanwhile, the Arleigh Burke destroyers weren't just using their hull-mounted sonar. They deployed their AN/SQR-19 towed arrays, essentially dragging their own underwater microphones to capture any sound the Russians produced. Legend has it that one Russian submariner asked his commanding officer if they could simply surface and surrender because the sonar pings were making him physically ill. The Russians weren't just being pursued, they were experiencing what happens when America decides to transform the entire ocean into a massive speaker system. The submarines soon had more sonar contacts on their displays than a social media influencer has followers. Between P-8s overhead, helicopters at various depths, and surface ships surrounding them, this wasn't hunting anymore. This was a demolition. NATO had converted the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour electronic music festival where Russia couldn't locate the exit, and the bass never stopped dropping. But here's the most beautiful part of this entire operation. Remember that Virginia-class submarine we mentioned earlier? For 48 straight hours, this American attack submarine maintained perfect tracking using its TB-34 towed array sonar, running so quietly on electric motors that it was essentially a ghost armed with torpedoes. The crew was observing this spectacle unfold like watching a documentary titled Submarine Warfare: Why Russia Can't Even. They were recording every sound, every evasive maneuver, every desperate attempt to break contact. The Russians tried everything in their playbook. Hide in underwater canyons, NATO positioned helicopters directly overhead with dipping sonar, like shooting fish in a barrel. Change depth dramatically, the destroyer sonar could track them from surface to seafloor. Sprint and drift tactics, the American submarine matched every move like a dance partner who knew the choreography better than they did. At one point, the Virginia's captain decided to send a message. One brief pulse of active sonar from their BQQ-10 bow array. Not enough to reveal their exact position, but sufficient to inform the Russians they'd been followed the entire time. Imagine being stalked by an invisible predator for 2 days. You can't see them, but they're definitely there, occasionally whispering, "I'm watching you," just to mess with your head. By day 2, the P-8 crews had developed a systematic approach. They timed their sonar pulses to disrupt REM sleep cycles, just as the Russian crews would begin drifting off to sleep. Ping!
It's like having a roommate who sets their alarm for every 5 minutes, but never actually wakes up. After 48 hours of this treatment, the Russian sailors were probably hallucinating colors that don't exist and conducting conversations with imaginary people. And the ordeal still wasn't finished. The Russians were about to get truly desperate to escape contact. After 48 hours of relentless pursuit, the 3 Russian submarines attempted every trick to break away. They utilized every technique in the Soviet operational manual, which would have been effective if this was 1982 and NATO hadn't written that manual themselves. Bottom terrain masking, the P-8 switched to magnetic anomaly detection. Radical depth changes, destroyers maintained coverage from surface to sea floor. Launch all remaining decoys, NATO systems catalog them like trading cards. Gotta catch them all, and they're all worthless. After hours of futile attempts, the Russians discovered that trying to lose NATO in the Norwegian Sea is like attempting to evade the tax authorities during audit season. They know where you are, where you're going, and exactly what you owe them. The Russians finally had to abort their intelligence mission, which in military terminology means run away while pretending it was always the plan. They withdrew northward, still submerged, probably composing their after-action reports about the successful reconnaissance operation that definitely didn't involve 48 hours of acoustic hammering. NATO maintained contact throughout their withdrawal, like security guards escorting troublemakers out of a nightclub. The P-8s followed them partway home to ensure they actually departed, and to add insult to injury, everyone understood exactly what had transpired, but appearances had to be maintained. During those 48 hours, NATO collected sufficient acoustic intelligence to identify these submarines from orbit. Every pump, valve, even their toilet flushing sounds are now permanently stored in NATO's acoustic database. Russian state media portrayed this as a successful intelligence gathering mission. Absolutely, and the Titanic successfully field tested its iceberg detection systems. What they actually learned was that the Norwegian Sea isn't contested waters, it's NATO's private swimming pool. The lesson was simple but profound. You can construct all the advanced submarines you want, but if you can't survive 2 days of democracy's greatest hits played through active sonar, maybe don't venture into the deep end next time.